Welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly video roundtable discussion show where we discuss all things fire service related. Firefighting Today is a production of PeteLamb.com. And now your host, Chief Peter Lamb.
Hello and welcome to Firefighting Today. We're going to have a topic tonight. We're talking about what is the most important issue in the fire service. Now, obviously, that's very subjective and certainly opinionated. So we've got a panel assembled for you here tonight. We have a smaller panel tonight, but we got a returning guest who's always a pleasure to have. If you are watching us live on YouTube, feel free to get on the YouTube chat and leave a comment. We'll be happy to interact with you if you have a question. In fact, I put something in the chat earlier. If you have what you believe is the most important topic, then feel free to do that. If you are not in the YouTube chat and you want to interact with us, if you send something and use it on Twitter at Pete Lamb, we're also monitoring that and we'll be able to interact with you as well over there. So just a brief note before we start tonight. I'm here in New England, obviously, and it is the 5th anniversary of the Boston Marathon bombing. So I would be remiss if we did not talk about that tonight. The bombing killed 3 people. Another police officer was murdered by the bombers, and lots of grief. So the marathon is going off tomorrow under some very, very difficult weather conditions, high wind and rain, but the marathon's the marathon. So it did affect lots of first responders involved in that incident. So I thought I would do that. So let's introduce the panel. Greg, why don't we start off with you, please?
Hey, good evening. Pleasure to be here. My name is Greg Howard, coming to you from Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada.
Thanks, Greg. We always appreciate you being with us. Greg was one of the maiden voyages on the roundtable when it started several years ago. Joe Starnes is a familiar face. Say hello, Joe.
Thank you, Chief. Joe Starnes, Project Kill the Flashover, Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department. Glad to be here, and I'll steal a line from Chief Harden. From the center of the universe, it's really from the center of the storm. So thank you again, Chief, for having me.
Yeah. Thoughts to both Chief Starnes and Chief Whitley here. They're getting beat up pretty good in their part of the world. Chief Fling, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Fling, a past chief with the Dix Hills Fire Department on Long Island, and I'm glad to be here, Chief. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure, Rob. Always like your insight. And Chief Whitley.
Hey, Warren Whitley, retired assistant chief from Prince William County, Virginia, and also part of Project Kill the Flashover. And if the tornado warning comes, I'm going to my closet.
That's certainly acceptable. If anybody's looking for a pretty outstanding fire chief, you should just email Chief Whitley. He's, have helmet, will travel. So he's there. So tonight we're talking about what is the most important topic. So that can go a bunch of different. What are you hearing? What do you think is an important topic? And what do you want to talk about tonight? This is kind of just a free for all here. We've got some viewers in the chat room. If you'd like to insert your comments, feel free, certainly. But Chief Fling, what are you thinking? What is an important topic or the most important topic? That may change by the time the discussion's over.
It's a good question, Chief. One of the things that I think actually needs to be a big topic is, I go to a lot of conferences, I go to a lot of seminars, I do a lot of training. And I think one of the things that needs to get done is more people need to use what they learn, because they need to take it back to their department and teach somebody as well. Because I see over and over again, guys will leave FDIC, guys will leave Firehouse Expo, and they'll go back to their department. And even though they were taught, they sat in class and they learned a lot of valuable information that could change the way that they operate. They just go back to their department and do the things they did over and over again, and it's like they never went to class to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good one, Rob. That's been a pet peeve of mine forever. It's you know what's the old, practice what you preach. You practice what you've been taught, and I think there's a great deal of that going around. It's almost the conferences are phenomenal events, and I would recommend any viewer or listener tonight to listen. If you haven't been to a national conference, you need to go to one. You have to go to a local regional conference, 2 or 3 departments training together. Go to those. But all of this is junk without action. And I think any of the other panel want to weigh in on that. So what are we gonna name this one, Rob? Not doing what we were taught. What's the problem? What are we gonna label it as?
Yeah, not putting into practice what you learned.
Right.
I've had the privilege of being with Chief Starnes and Chief Whitley for Fire Behavior University, and I have to tell you, what I've learned is phenomenal. And you go and you try to share that information, and a lot of times what you get is people staring off into space, people staring at their phones. This is good information, and if I took the time to learn it, you should have the I don't know if respect is the right word, or you should have an open mind to listen to it and actually, hey, you know what? Let's give this a shot, because this actually may change the way we operate.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, one of mine I'm going to talk about later. I won't. I'll just throw this out there as a seed right now. Is one of the things that I think is an important topic is, you know what, Rob, you sort of said it there, but I'm going to be pretty blunt with it. The fact is, we don't want to change. We don't practice the new technique because in real life we don't want to change.
No,
We
I would agree with that.
I think there's a great deal of that there, and I think that's a bit of a problem. Any of the other panel want to weigh in on that one before you pop up with one of your own? Joe Steins, what do you got?
Well, I think it's kind of leading up to what I was thinking about anyway. I think we're on the cusp of a major paradigm shift for the fire service, and we don't have the leadership to step up to it. Part of the reason is these kids are not taking back what they learned in a conference is they're not allowed to. Not always, but certainly they can improve themselves and work at the individual level. But the ability for an individual to go to a conference and do systemic change back in a large department is almost nil to none.
Yeah, well, I think you're right in a larger department, but there are small departments where people can come back and do something. Now, it's always a challenge. It's always, I should have brought this out tonight. In my clipping file, everybody's got a scrapbook, and there was a point at one point where I was labeled as a young Turk. And that was because I went to training and came back and wanted to do something about it, and I was one of those youngsters, and I'm going back quite a number of years, so that's not a new problem. But when you say leadership, are you talking about departmental leadership, or are you talking about the fire service leadership, Joe? What was your context?
I think they're both, Chief. For instance, I know fire chiefs that are token supporters of change, but when it comes down to it, they don't really want to change, like you said. I think leadership as a fire service is. I think the national leadership is almost nil to none right now. I don't see it. I don't, and maybe I'm looking for what I want to look for and not what really is out there. I think we're on a major paradigm shift. I think our customer needs are remarkably different now than they were, even though they're the same when it comes to life hazard. But I think we're dealing with a really strong change that we need. We're the highest rate of terrorism we're going to see. We're going to see fire loads that are unbelievably rich and going to burn rapidly. We're not watching our data from a burn standpoint. We're only watching the final result, the death and dying part. I think we're just missing leadership.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. Captain Owens is in the chat room, and he says the biggest problem is that the fire service has lost focus on its mission, and we're focused on everything but being firefighters, politics, human resource problems, and everything else. And I don't, I think I think we'll tie two of these things together, sort of where you were a minute ago, Chief Starnes, and where Captain Owens is. Listen, I've been a fireman a long time. I've been a chief officer for a long time. I'm not prepared to go to now we're going to active shooters and stuff like that. I mean, nobody prepared me for that. So our mission is changing in and of itself. And I think the demands by politics, human resource people, all the hiring practices, all of that. So, that's some of the things that are out there. Anybody else on the panel?
Just to add a note to that, I think our mission is, from a standpoint of overall mission, is not much different, but I think our context is drastically different.
Go further with that. Explain that.
Well, you said it with active shooter. We didn't used to have to worry about going to a fire call and getting shot. Now we're going to that call and can get shot, or we're going to a call where the shooter is the problem. I just think our context is drastically changing. And we're not adapting very well at all. And we've got a fire load that we refuse to assimilate that it's different. We've got, I don't know, we are just not stepping up to the challenge of the change, in my opinion. At the rate, I think at the rate we probably need to. Maybe we are, but not at the rate we should be, just to give it some credit. But
okay, well, yeah, I think the rate is our opinion, right? I think that I'm making change slowly, and the folks that work with me think I'm going 100 miles an hour. So it's our perception of the rate of change. Certainly that's an issue. Warren, what do you got? What's your issue? What's your biggest issue, or do you want to comment in on this one?
Well, I'll make a quick comment, then I have an issue. One is for paradigms to shift, and shift does happen, the dinosaurs have to go away. That's part of the issue we have. But the issue I want to bring up, since we don't have just one issue in the fire service, it's a myriad of things, is the disconnect between the building industry and the fire service. So if you look at all the lightweight construction and now these new lightweight I-beams are using them for floor trusses, things like that. I mean, they're not doing us any favors by the way they're trying to build things. And I think we're recognizing it, but we're still not putting the fire behavior piece to all that. And there's still guys out there that think they may have 15 or 20 minutes to operate in some of these modern construction buildings, and they don't. And that gets us in trouble.
Well, I have an interesting take on that. Is it their responsibility to look out for us, or is it their responsibility to put up cheap, affordable housing that will stand up when it's not on fire? And I'm being devil's advocate there. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, but is it the building industries? That's not their primary focus. Their focus is profit. They're being pushed to put up more buildings faster. I tell everybody that the society travels at the speed of money. What do you think they could do for us? I mean, sure, we should have residential sprinklers. That's what I think.
Part of it is they should quit lobbying against the codes that would restrict their ability to build some of this stuff without protection. But you know as well as I do, they throw an awful lot of money in lobbyists and making sure that those codes are in their favor, not ours. So.
No, I do agree. From the code standpoint, we certainly should listen. You can build whatever you want as long as you protect it somehow, some way. I think that's very valid without question. I think that's a good one. There's another one. I had an offline conversation, but out of the chat room, and I'm going to send this over to Greg. One of them, Dan, is in the chat room, and Dan's talking about manpower and recruitment. And that's kind of two issues, really. But Greg, you had some thoughts on that, didn't you?
Yeah, you asked me just as someone came in the door, so you might hear my dog bark there. There she is. Yeah, it's interesting. I saw the topic come up this morning when you were talking about it on the podcast, and in my world, probably staffing is our biggest issue. I work now for a career department, but I think it's true across North America and possibly into Europe with the with volunteer departments, and that putting firefighters in the seats on the trucks directly affects what we can do. Of course, the trucks. I'm sorry about the dog here. Is that overwhelming everybody, or are we getting by?
No, well, you know what? Let me skip you for a minute. You manage that, and we'll get back to you in just a second.
All right.
Rob, what is your story? You've got a volunteer perspective. What is your story about manpower and recruitment? What are you thinking about that as an issue?
Recruitment, I would say, is down, but that's a problem we've been facing for years. We're actually staffed right now, I would say, very well. If you look at the roles, we have plenty of people. Our main problem, in my opinion, is having those people available. We do run hot and cold response-wise, and sometimes it gets us in trouble to the point where one day I honestly think it's going to come back to bite us in the ass.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Now, you know, as you pointed out, you happen to be fortunate right now, and you have you've got adequate staffing on the roles. I think the issue for the career departments is how many career firefighters can be sustained by the community. In other words, what are we staffing for? I mean, everyone would listen, as a fire chief, I'll tell you, you want to run a good fire department, give me a tractor trailer load of $20 bills and several buses of manpower, and I'll put a pretty good fire department together pretty quickly. So are we talking about, I see manpower as two issues. One of them is total department staffing, as you kind of alluded to from the volunteer side and even from the career side. But the other problem with manpower is, deployed manpower on the fire ground. Do we have enough to deploy? That's kind of a separate issue as opposed to total staffing. So let's get back to Greg. Are you okay? Give me a thumbs up. Are you good?
We're good. The dog's been fed.
Yeah. So continue where you were going. So you were talking about your staffing concern. You're in a career department.
I'm in a career department, but of course I came from the volunteer end, like a lot of us did. And to what Rob was saying, we had exactly the same problems. I think they're universal across North America. We would have time of day issues, and for us, it was daytime because we're in my volunteer department, we're primarily a bedroom community. So evening, we could fill the trucks, and during the day, when most people work out of the community, we would struggle, sometimes having only one or two people to man a truck. So, and in where I'm at now, we have a community of about 100,000 people, running just under 10,000 calls a year with usually 16 to 20 people on staff. And so we struggle to make NFPA 1710 for a house fire, but we have lots of high-rise buildings, we're still running about 100 working fires a year, so it's not unforeseeable that we'll have consecutive fires or simultaneous fires, and then we're basically rolling the dice with the staffing we have. So in my world, the staffing, manpower, whatever you want to call it, is probably the biggest issue.
Yeah, I think the other is, so you're hitting it with 16 or 18 people, whatever it is. Tell me, so what happens at a working fire? Will you stay at that, or will you call in additional resources?
Yeah, we have a small. Unfortunately, it's dying out, but we have a on-call portion of the fire department that used to be much, much stronger, but we're running into the same issues with those guys. So they would come and help us with overhaul and rehab and cross covering. And we're to the point now, we've had a couple times where we've hit the pagers for the on-calls and got nobody. So right now, we don't have a mutual aid agreement. And so we rely on career callback. So we'll call a shift in. That happens on a regular basis. And that's how we manage the staffing when we need it. But it's one of those things where, if you lean on it enough, sooner or later, you're going to come up short.
Right. No, I agree. I agree. It is an issue. I've been in several discussions, probably in the past 60 or 90 days, talking about, the manpower on scene. And one of the problems that we talked about, we have to divide it in two ways. And one of them is city hall, town hall, whatever your form of government is. How much can they pay? How many firefighters and benefits and all of those things? But the second one is the on-scene piece, and that, in my mind, is the incident commander. I think he has an obligation to get the right number of people that he needs to do what he has to do or what she has to do. I think that's the responsibility there, and I think there's a reluctance for a variety of reasons. Departments that may not get along. We talked about that a little bit last week, and so forth. A couple of things out of the chat room. So Captain Owens says recruitment is down even for career testing in his area. We used to have 1,000 to 1,500 applicants, and now they barely get 300. That's a pretty interesting. That's in Virginia. That's a pretty interesting. He has a lot of hiring possibilities, but cannot get people to apply. The good news is Ethan's driving from Ohio. He's leaving right now. Ethan's on his way down there. So that's the good news. The other one is David's got a comment. He says, we spread ourselves too thin. Firefighting to specialized training and the basics are getting lost because there are less fires, overhauling, stretching a line, water supply, and etc. So I got to tell you, that was a topic. Nice catch, David. That was a topic that I spoke to Chief Burns, who has been on the roundtable a number of times. I was speaking to Kevin, and he said that one of the topics that he thinks is a real topic is lack of fires. Is the lack of fires, is the lack of experience making a difference? I don't know. I understand his point, and I think David's point is, does that make a difference in some ways? And I have a thought on that, but I'll yield to Warren. Warren, you got some thoughts or a comment on that?
Yeah, I really don't think there's any excuse for people not being proficient at pulling hose, using their overhaul tools or anything like that, because most people aren't running 30 calls a shift or they don't have time to do training. So I would put that up to a slack officer or a crew that has no motivation to go out and learn their craft.
Yeah, I think that fits in the career side, but I think in the volunteer side, if they're running a very minimal number of calls, I'm training once a week maybe, or what have you. How much can we achieve if we're having maybe 4 fires a year or something of that nature? The other thing that I think is interesting in as it relates to the lack of fires, and I've been doing a little bit of work on this, we've all heard of recognition prime decision making. And I think that one of the things that I'm seeing as I look at reports, as I'm a student of the trade every day, is I think we're missing the R. We're missing the recognition. There are people that have not seen or experienced, the proverbial slide in the tray, and therefore they don't know because they have not had that experience, or maybe have not had that training piece that fills in the gap. Now, obviously, training is not a replacement, but it could supplement experience. So I think that I agree with you, Warren. If you're a career department, then you need to be training. Certainly, that's a responsibility. But I think in the volunteer department, it's a little bit tougher to get those training accomplished. in a timely fashion if you're training. Rob, what do you train? Once a week or twice a month? What's your training schedule like?
Well, we have department training as well as company level training. So company level training usually takes place on a weekly basis, and department training is typically twice a month. It could be a little more often than that, but normally 4 weeks in a month we'll alternate fire with EMS and fire and EMS. But to that point, one of the things I think that's hurting the volunteer side as well, I know we have this conversation quite a bit around here, is the amount of time that it actually needs to dedicate yourself to the fire department now is actually hurting us recruitment wise. If you look at the amount of time it takes to be a firefighter here or a basic level EMT, it's considerably longer than it was years ago. You couple that with if you go and take some advanced classes over Firefighter 1, or if you go anything above the basic level of EMT, even as an EMT, you have to refresh your card every 3 years. You know, when people are working, Long Island's not a cheap place to live. And a lot of people, the husband and the wife are both holding full-time jobs. Sometimes people are working more than one job to make ends meet. And you couple that with kids and busy schedules, and people really don't have the time to give as much as they think they do.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's a perfect segue here. Dan says, speaking from the under 30 group, the social aspect of the fire service isn't as strong as it used to be. Volunteers need incentives to risk cancer and put their lives on the line, as well as the training requirements that I think you just pointed out. Chuck says that the medical side is busier every year, and we will try to have training in the morning, unit by unit. And everybody else is on medical calls. So, you know, if you're doing a career department, he starts with 24 people in the morning, and then slowly those people dwindle because they're chasing medical calls. So that's certainly a real possibility. So that's a good thing. What else have we got for topics? Joe Steins, you got something?
No, I was just going to comment on the volunteer thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
Oak Grove, Cleveland County just passed a 3.5 cent ad valorem tax this year. And they did that to put two part-time people in every fire station in the county. That brings up a couple of points. One is these part-time people are allowing the volunteers more time to train because the checkoff sheets, the truck readiness is taken care of during the day now, even though there's value in learning that process during their learning as a volunteer. So there are some things that go hand in hand with a little better discussion with that. One is the fact that we refuse to have the discussion about firefighting and suppression's efficiency and effectiveness. If it goes out, what is it, Chief? You say you must be the best fire chief.
Every fire I've ever been to is out today.
Right. So we don't talk about efficiency or effectiveness of firefighting. The other thing is that I think from the standpoint of recruiting, Oak Grove's recruiting now is as strong as it's ever been, simply because of the 3.5 cent sales tax. It just put 2 people in the station. It didn't put there's 8 pieces of apparatus there. 2 people theoretically shouldn't have affected that much at all, but it has a lot. Because many of our calls are not the very thing that we say we need. We need this big fires. We're not having them. But many of our calls are really literally not much to them at all. I don't think you can get safety out of experience. I think you can eventually, but I think the front end of that's pretty expensive. If I send an unskilled firefighter to a call and he survives it, then God bless him. And now he's smarter for it, or she's smarter for it. But I don't think that's the way to get it. I think we're lazy on the front end. I don't think we're spending the time training that we could. It's like Warren says, we're sitting on our butts some. I think it's not the answer, but it's certainly a lot better than it is my point. We've got to want to. Mrs. Smith has got to be the focus. We need to know what the most calls types we're running, and we need to make sure we're ready for those call types. And we're just not doing the things I think we can do to be a better and more effective fire department. Now, am I down on it? No. I'm just saying we're going to have to pick up the pace of doing it better because of the need to do it better. And I agree with it. I don't think we can run all the 911 calls with the same people. I think that's going to change someday. I think there's too many options for 911 that needs the fire service, quote unquote, today that is going to the government just can't afford to staff for. We're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to spend some time. That's the reason I say the leadership's got to step up to this. We got to know more. There need to be more of these calls with data like we did with Mayday. You said something this week about Mayday and RIT teams, Chief. Why don't you dive into that a little bit? Because you talked about mutual aid, not calling mutual aid. You did a little bit a while ago. There are things that we just don't do that we use for a standard excuse all the time. I'll shut up at this point.
I doubt that, but thank you for that. No, it's good. You had a couple of things. There were a couple of points there. Ethan's talking about that even in the state of Ohio, it could be as little as 36 hours without a live burn to be able to get certified to some level to state certification. And I think that's an issue. The thing that Joe and I were talking about offline, and I'm not going to get into the specifics, is that sometimes when we train, we do things that are, I don't want to say fun. We do things that are challenging. We do things that are we're interested in. And you talk about we're training for things that may not be, if you looked at data, you may not see that data tell the same story. So I think, Warren, you're a stickler on data as well. And I think that, could we set up our training plan based upon data? How would we, what things are we looking at? How do we move? The other challenge that Oak Grove will have, and I can say from experience here, when you start putting per diem people in, and you're putting the per diem folks in there, you have a situation where that affects the volunteer response. The volunteer that used to get up and go will now say, yeah, we'll let the career guys go, or we'll let the per diem folks go, and we'll see what the report is when they get there, and then I'll move. I think it does have a cultural effect in the organization. Rob, do you want to jump in there?
That's actually a vicious cycle when you think about it. I see that happen a lot around here. The call volume is up. There's no doubt about that. And sometimes the response it can be an issue, whether it's the number of people that respond or if they respond in a timely fashion. So some of the fire districts need to supplement their EMS population, specifically around here, with paid employees, per diem EMTs. And the volunteer side looks at it as, well, I don't have to come down on the call because the paid people are going to take it. But the caveat to that is, if the volunteers were doing their job, there would be no need for the paid people. So it actually just goes around and around in a circle.
I agree, right? If the response was up, then certainly that wouldn't be the case. No, I agree. What else do we have for topics that are the most important topics? We got, Joe, you were talking about, one of your issues was, we spoke offline, you were talking about critical thinking. Our training process. I think one of the greatest things you say as a quote all the time is, the greatest spot for freelancing in the fire service is in the classroom. But you have some thoughts on how we learn and what we learn. What are you thinking?
Well, the discussions around we reinforce process. We're a lot of times we are a plumber's helper training ground trying to teach a scientist's method of learning. Um, we're learning. We're taught to learn facts, not theory. We're not taught to challenge things. We're taught to just do what we're told to do, and then we become righteous about that. And our educational system really reinforces this form of teaching us a whole bunch of things, and then we assimilate it on the fire ground, or we assimilate it as a trade. I think we are just mixed up. I think we don't. When I go into a classroom, I may have, if I have 100 people in the room, I'm lucky if I have 10 or 15 that are really want to learn the higher level learning of that. They want to be able just to do it faster, better, or better tools, better equipment, and do what they're doing better. My favorite line is I had a manager in AT&T one time. I took him a plan to change a process, and he looked at me after looking at it. He looked at it. He said, "Joe, we're going to have the best, worst process in the company." And what he meant by it was working on the wrong thing. I need to be transforming it, not improving it. Its capability to improve it wasn't. The capability to improve it was not there to make it do what we needed it to do. We're just learning. We go into a class now thinking we're going to learn to do what I do better. We don't go into a class thinking I'm going to learn something that's going to challenge what I know. I think a leader is not a leader until he's managed a paradigm shift in his organization. I think that's when you become a leader, because that is when all the rules and all the things don't work to accomplish what you want to accomplish. You have to get off your butt and go to work, because you got to take every person through that learning curve, and they have to learn the why along with the what. We're out of the business of the why. I don't know many classes that teach it unless you're teaching the why of something you're already doing.
Well, let me ask you, devil's advocate position here. Do we need to know? I've got, and I'll toss this by Greg, because Greg's got the paramedic side of this, so I'll make some ridiculous metaphor here and say, if I got a person with difficulty breathing and I'm an EMT on an ambulance getting ready to transport, do I need to know the whole physiology of his disease and the destruction of his lung tissue, or do I need to know how to, give him oxygen, give him Lasix, escape fluid off him, whatever the particular problem is? I think we're talking about, when you kind of said two things, Joe. You said the discussion of we're tradesmen and then we're trying to be scientists. And I can't, I think I agree with what you're saying, and I'm just saying, where is the medium to that?
Well, I don't disagree with you, Chief, but let me couch it, and then I'll give Greg the floor here. Let me couch it. Firefighter 1 riding a truck, firefighter 2 riding an engine, captain riding an engine. I would argue that each one of them needs to be differently skilled, and that the basic stuff you need to be able to do really well, no matter what rank or role you play. But I think what happens is, if we don't divide that out very well, you don't go to class by rank anymore. The seminars are open to everybody, and I don't disagree with that. It's just that we don't divide the information up to learn that way. When you teach a class now at a symposium, you got to be prepared to talk to the person that's the firefighter 1 and the person that's the captain with 30 years. And because of the nature of the context of the change, we are focusing on all of it, not in roles anymore. I'll shut up. Greg, go at it.
I'll do my best here. I think this is a real reflection of modern day society, and I'm going to try and tell the time here without building a watch. But this is a panel made up of analytical thinkers, and it's not a reflection of the people you meet out on the street. I'm going to say that 80% of the people we deal with in the fire service and on the street are intuitive thinkers, and they like to go with the easiest answer. And that's just human nature. I'm trying to remember the author's name. Thinking Fast and Slow, type 1, type 2 thinking, analytical versus intuitive thinking. The easy way for our brain to work is to go with the intuitive answer. And right now we've got a generation or more of people who would rather take information they see on YouTube than from someone who is a dedicated expert in the field. So a couple guys on the panel here are experts in fire behavior. If you're going to go for brain surgery, do you want to go to the person who spent 8 years in school or somebody who's learned how to do it on YouTube? This is a mentality shift that we have in society away from it's anti-intellectualism, and it's been growing for 3 decades, in my opinion. And I think that that's one of the root causes of the issues we're talking about right now. Well
said. Well said. See, I told you I missed you on the panel. Very, very nicely done. And I think, that's one of the other ones. We flirted with the other one is there a big topic in the fire service? And I'm changing my position on that as well. And that is, it's because of this new generation. It's because of these millennials, and it's because of all of those kinds of things or whatever. And I think that we as a fire service have some responsibility there. I think we have to mold folks. We have to mentor folks, and we can't black tag everyone that doesn't fit in our generational thinking or our type of thinking. I do love Greg's comment about the University of YouTube. If you want to know something, I graduated from the University of YouTube, and therefore I do know how to do all of that. So I think that one of the other topics is the new generation any different than when somebody was saying I was a young rabble rouser? So I think that, I think that's a place. And I think Greg also makes the point in the chat room here that, there is a lot to be gained from YouTube if it's put in context and taken out there. It does allow you to see some things and get some other thoughts. Warren, what are your thoughts? Is there a generational problem, or is it us and our reaction to the generational problem?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I went to the EFO symposium at the Fire Academy a week or two ago, and there was a presentation on the kids coming after the millennials, which they're calling iGen. So the little I, like iPhone, iPad, whatever. And they had a lot of interesting comments about how to deal with their behaviors and the challenges we're gonna have, I guess, assimilating them into the fire service. These are the ones they described as being scared most of the time. They're afraid of the next big event that's going to come down and crush them, whether it's a mass shooting or some of these weird weather things. So they're very, and we're talking generalizations here, but they're generally thought of as being fragile. So as far as finding ones that actually want to be firefighters or even police, where they can expect hazardous situations in their career, we're probably going to be the outliers of that generation, or the people that we get. So,
go ahead.
Yeah, just something to be looking forward to.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to Greg for some further on the YouTube. But while we're talking about the generational thing, I may have recounted this on a podcast, but it bears mention because it fits right here where we are. And I was in a place with no radio reception, and the only radio reception I could get was talk radio, and that's not my genre that I listen to all the time. And this person was going on and on and on. And he said that the World War II veterans were not the greatest generation. He didn't believe they were the greatest generation. So my father, being a World War II veteran, long since passed, but you know, my blood was just boiling. I want to bend the steering wheel while I'm listening to this conversation. And what he then went on to say really struck me. And he said, I don't think they were the greatest generation. I think it was their parents who made them what they were and made them into the greatest generation. And I think the same thing applies to us in the fire service, is that we have to mentor, counsel, and get people to a position. I don't think anybody is untrainable. And I think that what we've got to do is they make us uncomfortable because they don't think like us. And they make us uncomfortable because it's a lot of work for us to lead them. So I think that's the generational thing puts a lot more work on, you know, Joe started the conversation tonight with, you know, with leadership and what, you know, stepping up and what have you. So I think that some of this falls on us at least. And I think every generation, if we look back on it, would probably, you know, somebody was thinking that I was, you know, that kid's never going to catch on. I mean, they were correct in a lot of ways, you know, so. But Greg, where were you going to go? You're going to follow up on your previous.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I have young kids. I have 7 and 8 and 24. There's a gap, but you know, I think we're at an interesting place in time with, we speak about the generations coming in. I think now we're starting to see people that can digest this overwhelming tidal wave of information we get every day on our phones and the internet, and be able to filter through the spam and the fake news. But you know, people, I'm going to say it, of my generation and you know, possibly my parents, where this is so new that a lot of people struggle with it. I think it goes to what you used to watch the news, and the news had ethics, and you expected everything you saw in the news to hold up to a test. And now when you watch the news is a race to get things there first. And that's a skill that we need to, the critical thinking skill, to be able to research things and find out where the actual truth is before we apply them. Not everybody has it. And I think that's, you know, a major stumbling block for what we're going through right now. I think, Warren, we're going to see a bunch of very different people coming in. I look at some of my very dear friends are helicopter parents, and, you know, we grew up and stood on the front seat of the car and looked out the window going down the highway, and rode our bikes over jumps and knocked our teeth out. And I've got a couple teeth to show for it. And then we have another generation where a lot of people were never allowed to learn that judgment about what hurts. These are all things in the strong fire officer is going to be somebody. There's my dog again. Just a second. Sorry, guys.
Disappointed your teeth issue wasn't hockey. You're Canadian.
All right, let me pick it up while Greg resolves that. Greg, give me a thumbs up when you've got that resolved. We'll go to the chat room. Captain Owen says it's a paradigm shift, even in the fire service values. Professionalism definition has changed. 20 years ago, someone probably would not get hired if they had a visible tattoo. Today, that's not uncommon at all. I mean, not that that's the measurement, but it certainly has. The word professionalism has changed in its meaning among many others. It's gotten to the point that we may never accept it, but we have to tolerate it or quit. I don't know. I put a third definition in there, a third choice in there, and or we'll try to fight it and make it into the profession that we thought it would be. It may never return. I agree. But certainly that was the case. Greg, are you set now?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay.
Yeah, in my experience, learning, I used to think as a chief officer, you could see the solutions to things and implement them, and that was the hard part. And what I'm learning now more is that's the easy part. The hard part is now delivering the content in a way that people will adopt it. And I'm sure, Chief, you can speak to that, and many of the other chiefs on the panel.
Yeah, that is you can have the greatest program in the world, but if nobody's going to buy it, you can't. There are fire chiefs, and I know some closely, and I have some afternoons where I'm sure I'm doing that. I'm trying to sell encyclopedias, and nobody wants an encyclopedia. They can look it up on the internet. So sometimes I catch myself in that trap. Certainly myself. Let's run the panel. Let's talk about are the topics that we talked about. They're all very topical, bad sentence there, but are these the most important, or are there others? Right? I mean, we could talk about the fitness thing. We certainly could talk about any of the. We've kind of dabbled in the modern science area already. We talk about fitness. We talk about cancer. We talk about any of those topical things. How did we? I had asked the panel members, and I'll run the panel. I'll start with Warren. How did you come up with your topic? What led you? What is it that makes us think it's a topical issue? How did you come up with your topic, Warren?
Well, part of it was stuff I've been reading over the last week about some of these building construction elements and things we've seen happen recently, like the cladding on the outside of the high rises in Europe, the I-beam construction or the lightweight I-beams and residential fires here. So that just got me kind of thinking about it. There's a whole lot of other topics I could bring up. I don't think there is just the one that's the fire service topic of the day. That's all they are of the day. There's 365 days in the year. I can have a topic for each one of them.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's pretty fickle of what we do. And I think, Warren talked about it. If any of you have not done some work with looking at this engineered construction and engineered structural members, is this stairway, what do they call that? I think it's is it called the I stairway or whatever? It's all pre-constructed, manufactured. That one's one that certainly gives me a scare. For the listeners and the viewers out there, if you go to the Green Maltese, as John Schaefer has got a lot of work on this engineered construction. Certainly Chris Naum and others are doing some work there. Rob, what do you want to summarize with as we begin to wrap it up?
Well, I think if you asked 100 people what the topic was, you'd get 100 different answers about, what's hot, what needs to be talked about, what are the problems. But, I don't know. I think that we need to learn from past experiences. We need to take that and move forward. If you read Line of Duty Deaths, we have not come up with a new way to kill a firefighter in a really long period of time. We just repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And many of the topics that you just brought up, fitness, cancer, whether it be you're getting killed in some type of fire behavior accident, are all things that have happened before. And we actually we probably will never be able to eliminate everything 100%, but we have the solution to many of those problems now. And it's just going to require the shift that Chief Starnes and Chief Whitley was speaking about before, that, that's when we're going to really make progress. When we can learn some of these, we can learn from our past mistakes, and we can actually say, you know what, we can't let this happen again. We're gonna read, we're gonna learn, and we're gonna implement. And then at that point, we'll be able to move forward.
Yeah, that's a great phrase. That's a good catchphrase for a summary statement. Read, learn, and implement. That's very well done. Chief Starnes, what do you got as we summarize here tonight?
Well, I think your hot topics, whatever's affecting you, if you're a fire department and you've got staffing issues, you got safety issues, you got whatever, you got water issues, you got whatever. I think your hot topic's whatever you're facing, not necessarily what a profile or a distributional model says it is. So that's my take on what's hot. The bit of wisdom for us, I think, is to put Mrs. Smith first and start worrying about it, constant improvement. I think if we did that, we would change a lot of our decision models if we did that. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, we talk about line of duty deaths, we talk about injury statistics, we talk about that, and the fact remains that in 2018, there's still about 3,000 civilian deaths by fire, and that is our focus. That's why we're here. So I think that's important. Greg, your summary statement.
I'm sure I won't be nearly as eloquent as everybody else, but I think we're in all of these issues. I'm 100% confident that the fire service will adapt, and we're never going to have people stop having emergencies. And where we were primarily fire suppression and property safety, we're now moving into technical rescue and EMS, and there's a mission shift. But as far as adapting to new generations of people entering the fire service, some of the most tremendous leaders I know are in the fire service, and I'm sure we're going to find a way to adapt to it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to end it. We'll end on that note, Greg, and that is this. We are an organization, trade, whatever it is we are, motorcycle gang, whatever it is we are. I think that we have the ability. We've done incredible things all throughout our history. And when there's a job to be done, the fire service will do it. So the things we talked about are relatively minor issues in a way, but somebody has to, and to quote Chief Viscuso, somebody has to step up and lead. Shameless plug for his book, but that's really what we need, and that's what needs to take place. So we will get around this. We will be able to overcome whatever the challenge is, and we need to be, I think the critical thinking piece we talked about tonight is important, because the solution may not be the traditional solution. We got to really think a lot differently about how to do this. And I think I'm becoming more and more, we have to look at data. We have to look at the facts. My opinions here tonight on this panel really don't mean anything. It's factual data and what's working. And I think, Chief Stein's last point, what is an important topic? It's the joke, what is major surgery and what is minor surgery? Well, major surgery is anything I'm having, and minor surgery is anything you're having. So it is the topic that is most important to you that is going to rise to the surface. So with that, I think we'll let it go at that. We will see the viewers back. Thank you for the folks that interacted in the chat room. That's what makes this show work. We appreciate that. And we will see you here next week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.